Okay, we've got the new alternator. I've taken the top off this one to check the brushes and everything are correctly assembled, which they weren't before. I've kept this part here, which goes onto the new one. There's a woodruff key just there, which you've got to not lose. This has got to be bolted to the back of it. There's a strengthening ring between the two plates. The main thing is for the vent to be at the bottom. See, there's a vent slot there, so we'll put it together. I'm actually going to put a bit of tape around to hold the two halves together, just while I start trying to put all this back into the car. Right, well, I learned something from when I removed this. I'm going to put this plate roughly into the right position, and then I'm going to put the alternator here, slide it in, slide these bolts through, then jiggle it back and put the nuts onto the back. At least that's the plan. So something like this, and all I have to do is slide it in, wheel everything through like that. Then I can bring both back slightly, and by jiggling the fan housing slightly, I think I can put the nuts onto the back which hold the alternator to this plate. We'll see now. That was a silly idea, it didn't work, I can't reach the nuts, so we go back to the conventional way, which is with the contacts for the electronics at the top and the vent hole at the bottom, we bolt the alternator to this backing plate with these two nuts, and then we try and put it into this hole. Okay, we're back at this stage now. We've nearly got this popped through the hole in the centre of the fan, but first I've got to put the two shims back on, which I'll do with those surgical forceps I used when I removed them. So the alternator is roughly in place. I've pulled up the right hand side of the fan shroud just a tiny bit. Here's our two shims in my surgical forceps, and we're going to reach down here and carefully, without dropping it into the engine, put them onto the end of the alternator spindle, which then will pop through the fan hopefully. So now you can see, well, you might be able to see just there, the shims are on. Now I've got to pop that screw thread through the hole in the middle of the fan. Okay, you'll have to take my word for it now, but the fan is on. This is in position but not bolted up yet, and to get the fan on, basically I've got one of these very powerful LED torches. It's like turning the sun on. It's very useful if you shine it down the crack here. You can just look down this gap here and see what's going on, while at the same time reaching around the back here, and you can pick up the fan and start jiggling it around, because the hole it fits onto has two flats on the sides and it has to be on properly. So the next thing now is to screw the fan on just finger tight with the correct nut and washers. So I've got a freezer bag. Freezer bags are great for all this kind of thing, with the alternator clamp, and also, oops, here we go, the springy washer with the flats on the side, and then the big nut that holds the fan on. So the nut on the back holding the fan on is now finger tight. I'd like to do it up a little bit tighter, so I'm going to put the pulley on here with a woodruff key here, and by just turn that a little while holding the nut on the back in a socket, and then we'll just get it sort of moderately tight. I can spin the alternator and check that the fan isn't off center or anything peculiar like that. So this is the new fan, the new pulley, sorry. Pulley with fan, alternator only, front and rear, Brasilia. So this is for a Mexican Beetle. The pulleys vary, but as you can see, this one has the two halves that with lugs that interlock between the two parts, and it has the centre hole with Woodruff key slot, and we need to put the shims that we took off the old one between the two. If you remember, I destroyed the old pulley, so that's why I had to buy a new one. And all I did here was put a socket on the back nut of the fan. I've temporarily put this on here. The Woodruff key, I think it's a little bit too big, needs a bit of fettling, and I just got a welding glove, grabbed this, held the spanner tight and just turned it until the fan nut is now on, you know, medium tight, and we just check it's all spinning okay. You can feel the fan at the back just to check it's not off centre as you do this, and then we'll start bolting everything up in the correct position, and then we'll do the final tightening at the end. This was a fairly tight fit. To get it all the way back, I had to actually file the inside just a little to get some of the spare paint and stuff off. So that's on now, so we'll leave that for where it is. We'll now start the painful procedure of putting the fan shroud back down, clamping up the bolts. Then we're going to start doing these up, and I'll probably start with the bottom two as they're the real difficult ones. I don't really know how to describe how hard it is to get the bottom left bolt back in. I used a thin section ring spanner on the open end. I basically reached from underneath with the nut between my the bolt between my fingertips, got it in the hole eventually, managed to wiggle it around till it just caught on the thread, and then with the open end of the spanner down here made very small turns. I had one hand holding the spanner, hang on, from below like this between the tips of my fingers, and another one on the top here, and I sort of gripped it and then moved it round flat against this surface, and it just took ages to do up basically. One thing I found with the other side, the right bottom, was it helped if you, once you got the bolt on from underneath like that, you can reach it, was to use a piece of flat metal like that and use it as a pusher. You see, I'll just put that in there, push back, it just pushes it in the hole, and then with your other hand, I'm trying to film this, you can turn the spanner and it applies pressure as you do it. Really difficult. Here I'm just putting the clips for the HT leads back into these holes. There's one on the left as well. It just pushes in like that. It's not that tight, and then we'll put the HT leads back into the clip. Right, I'm now doing up the 10mm bolt on each side of the fan shroud. So here's the fan shroud. Down here with the spanner stuck on it is the bolt. You can see the shroud goes inside the tinware. So the shroud goes down on the inside of the tinware, and it's the same the other side. So we do those up and that clamps. I'm now putting this vacuum tube thing back on side of the throttle body, which runs around here. I'm also putting the heater pipes back onto the tinware. Next thing will be the clamp, which holds the alternator down, and then we'll torque up the fan bolt. Okay, here I've got my 36mm socket on the fan nut at the back. The bar is braced against this bit of bodywork, and it's held on with some tape. Then we stick a nut on the front of the pulley, and I have got a proper torque wrench somewhere down there, but I've actually got one of these old-fashioned ones. You can see now, you just do it up, there we go, to 40 foot-pounds. There we are, don't know if you can see that, and that'll tighten the nut up on the back. So now we're going to take this, put a 19 19mm spanner on there, and then we're going to undo this nut. So this way we've tightened up the fan at the back. 40 foot-pounds isn't that tight, but that's what the spec is. So here I'm holding my, I'm basically taking the strain off the fan nut at the back by a 19mm spanner put on here. I'll just hold that tight and then turn this one anti-clockwise, and that way I can get this nut off without unscrewing my fan nut that I've only just tightened up. Okay, I won't bore you with every single detail of the reassembly process because it's basically the reverse of what we've just done, but main things are we've put the pulley back on. I've got some shims this side, some shims between, just to get the tension about right on the fan belt. This is done up to 40 foot-pounds, which transmits through to the nut that's holding the fan on, because it's actually the nut that holds the fan on that should be at 40 foot-pounds, but this will take that without disintegrating. So I kind of put a socket on the back of the fan housing on the nut that holds the fan on, and then torque this one to 40 foot-pounds gently back up. So all my wiring is back on. HT leads that were moved out of the way have been put back. The clips that hold the HT leads, there's one in there, there's one down there, I've pushed back into the holes in the fan shroud. Air cleaner back on, obviously. Heater pipes back on. That's about it really. So would I do it again this way? Basically it's all fine apart from the bottom left bolt that holds the on this plate that bolts up to the fan shroud that the alternator's mounted to. That's the real sod to get at. It can be done, but you've got to have long thin fingers, a lot of patience, a slim 10mm spanner, and it's just almost impossible, but not quite. So there we are. It's probably better than taking the engine out, even so.